Welcome to OpenLegacy. In this video, we demonstrate how Apigee can manage APIs created with the OpenLegacy IDE platform. We open the OpenLegacy IDE and create an SDK project. This project allows us to integrate with the legacy application. In this case, we select mainframe as our legacy backend. We enter the connection details we need to access the mainframe and the COBOL program on the mainframe. Once the connection is set up, we click Finish to create the OpenLegacy SDK project. Within that OpenLegacy SDK project, we need an entity to analyze, parse, and generate a POJO model. In this case, we create an entity based on this open account COBOL program. We parse it, and we define the COBOL program that will be executed on the mainframe. When we click OK, the POJO is generated. This model is a representation of the COBOL program, and you can see that everything was defined, all of the fields, and all of the actions. We now right-click on the project, run the connector, and then run Maven install. This compiles the SDK project so that we can use it in our next step. We now create an API project to expose a REST API service. We will use the OpenLegacy SDK as our reference project and click Finish. This creates a brand new API project that allows us to expose the REST API. To do this, we click OpenLegacy, Generate API from SDK, and we name our service. The OpenLegacy SDK is available, and we can define a contract with the attributes of the POJO model. We now have a service to call up the information that we need to expose. The service is ready to use, so we just right-click on the project and deploy it locally. Deploying the service locally will allow us to ensure that we can access the SDK, test that the SDK executes the COBOL program on the mainframe, and returns the response. The service is deployed and running on Tomcat on port 8080. Opening the browser, we can see the new service is available on our Swagger page, ready for testing. We add some values in the JSON and execute the service. The API connects to the mainframe COBOL program and returns a response, again in JSON. Now we go to the Apigee Edge dashboard to create an API proxy. We create the proxy, name it, and point it to the API we previously created and deployed to AWS. We pick up the service endpoint URL and use it for the API proxy on the Apigee dashboard. Clicking Next brings us to the authorization settings. We use pass-through. We then select the virtual host and select Default to deploy to a test environment. We are now ready to build and deploy the API proxy within Apigee. After the proxy has been built and deployed, we can see its details. Notice that we have a URL available that was configured within Apigee, and that's the code generated by Apigee. We now go to Postman to test the proxy. Instead of going directly to the endpoint service, we will go through the Apigee URL that was created for the API proxy and use the same contract, request, and response as before. We set up the header to post to the proxy URL and the content type to application JSON. We now define the body of the request, which we copy from the request in Swagger. The request body will therefore be exactly the same. We copy the request into the raw section of Postman, make a few changes, and send it through the Apigee API proxy to the mainframe. The proxy returns the response from the mainframe, going through the OpenLegacy layer and the Apigee layer.